Back in the Vince days, I used to be.
Oh, yeah, back in the Vince days. We're back live with Senate Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs, and we're shifting from booze to cannabis. So I know, really exciting. So we have been in the process of reviewing H-270, which is our cannabis housekeeping bill. And we have asked the Senate Agriculture Committee to review the sections of the bill that relate to agriculture and propagation, cultivation and propagation. Uh-oh, did this block? Is somebody trying to get in?
No.
Okay. And so we're going to first hear from Senator Starr and Council Mike O'Grady on that. And then in about half an hour, we're going to shift and hear from Health and Welfare about the medical marijuana. So Senator Starr and Councilor O'Grady, it is a delight to have you in our committee. Welcome. And would you be kind enough to share with us your work on sections 3A through sections 3B?
Well, I'll lead off and thank you for inviting us in.
It's a pleasure.
And the Ag Committee did, I think, do diligence with the request. We had the chair of the board in, the executive director that runs it, Brent, and the Cannabis Association, along with quite a few members that are just growers, small growers, and all outdoor grow. And we work with the board, the cannabis board, and the executive director on every issue to make sure that it didn't go into conflict with their thoughts and ideas. And we made several changes and updates to the bill as recommended by both the growers as well as the executive director and the board. And everyone was in agreement with these changes we made.
That you're about to propose?
Yes, and there was always some that wanted to go a little bit further and do things a little bit different, but that will evolve as this market evolves. You have to tweak things as you move along. And so, but where we ended up, the committee was unanimous on that, in both the director and
the growers.
And the growers.
That's great.
Yeah, it really went quite well. And so Michael run through the language.
Okay. And for our committee, we have the proposed language from Mike. You can see it's draft 3.4 of H-270 dated this morning at 9:31. So thank you very much for your work, Senator Starr. I think this is just great committee partnering here on getting this bill across the line in the time frame we have.
Yeah.
So Mike, why don't you take it away?
Sure. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. Just to provide you context about how cultivation of cannabis is regulated, you can see on page 1, lines 11 through 15, that it provides that cannabis establishments shall not be regulated as farming under the RAPs or other state law, and cannabis produced from cultivation shall not be considered an ag product, farm crop, or agricultural crop for purposes of use value, sales tax exemptions, or other relevant state law. That was a policy decision that the General Assembly made in 2020 to not regulate cannabis, any cannabis establishment as farming. But you said at that time that cultivation, processing, and manufacturing needed to comply with all applicable state, federal, local, environmental, energy, or public health laws. And that's important because when anything is designated as farming, it receives what I call the regulatory benefits of farming.
Exemptions from many things.
Or the authority to say enroll in use value, which is not necessarily an exemption. It's taxing the land at its use value. So those regulatory benefits were not extended to farming in 2020.
And so this would also mean when you say use value, that I assume you're assuming our use value appraisal program. I mean,
That's correct.
current use.
32 VSA chapter 124.
Right, which is what we have right here. So just so people know that so they are not, cannabis growers are not, they'd have
No
to.
cannabis establishment under that language, no cannabis establishment was qualifying as farming. But you did say on page 2, lines 4 through 17, that certain aspects of the required agricultural practices related to
Sorry, where are you?
page 2,
Yeah,
lines 4 through 16, that those certain RAPs, the rules that govern how farming is operated for purposes of water quality, that they would apply to cannabis establishments. You didn't want cannabis establishment, because it was not farming, to be able to engage in practices that would impair water quality. So they had to comply with those RAPs. But in 2022, small cultivators came to the General Assembly and said that they requested 4 regulatory benefits that farming normally receives. They requested the ability to be regulated as farming under Act 250, which means it's not development and is exempt from Act 250. They requested the ability to be treated as farming under municipal bylaws, and municipal bylaws cannot regulate farming. They requested the ability to enroll in use value if their land was already eligible to be enrolled in use
so
value.
if otherwise eligible.
Right, so meaning it was being used as an RAP prior to cannabis cultivation. And they requested application of the agricultural sales tax exemptions to small cultivation. And you granted them that. And that was just last year.
We did that in 22.
22. This year, as the chair just stated, as the chair of Ag just stated, the board and the growers both requested and agreed to changes to expand those 4 regulatory benefits to all cultivators and to provide cultivation, outdoor cultivation, and this is all for outdoor cultivation, to provide outdoor cultivators the right to farm nuisance protection that farming cultivators also receive. And so that is what on page 3, lines 1 through 21, that entire page. It first starts off with that notwithstanding subsection A, notwithstanding the statement that cannabis establishments are not
No, or
farming.
not farming, right?
Any cultivator licensed under the chapter who initiates cultivation of cannabis outdoors on a parcel of land, so indoor cultivators, hydroponic cultivators, they're not going to get these benefits. Shall be regulated in the same manner as farming and not as development on the tract of land where cultivation occurs for the purposes of permitting under Act 250. That's 10 VSA chapter 151. So all outdoor cultivators will be exempt from Act 250. And then subdivision 2 on line 8 shall not be regulated by a municipal bylaw in the same manner that required agricultural practices are not regulated by municipal bylaw. Farming is exempt from municipal regulation, and you're saying now that outdoor cultivation is also exempt from municipal regulation. Third is that they would be eligible to enroll in the use value appraisal program for the cultivation of cannabis. Now, as I stated previously, for the small cultivators, when last year you said that the ag land or farm building where the cannabis cultivation occurs was enrolled in use value prior to commencement of the cannabis cultivation. So it actually was already in use value. The fact that it was going to be used for cannabis cultivation wouldn't
Impact,
disenroll.
right, wouldn't kick them out.
But this language would allow, and that basically meant that only people that were currently farming could cultivate cannabis and still remain in use value. And what the Ag Committee is proposing, at the agreement of the board, is that any outdoor cultivation would be eligible to enroll in use value appraisal, regardless of whether or not the land was enrolled in use value or being farmed prior to cannabis cultivation.
Got it. And this would fall under that, not the 25-acre rule, but it would fall under the ag, the small amount. There's an exemption for ag that can have a very small amount of
Less
land.
than 25
And
acres.
down to
Backtrack
a
for-
strawberry patch.
Yeah.
As long as you generate more than
51%.
$3,000.
No, but you have to be a farmer, right? Because use value is only available to farmers, and there's different
No,
ways
it's available to other people too, but in agriculture.
in agriculture, right? There's ways that you qualify as a farmer. One is you get 50% of your income from farming as defined by IRS code. IRS code isn't going to define cannabis cultivation
Sure.
as farming. So you're not going to qualify there. So you have to go down to the secondary one, and that's where you generate a certain amount of income from the sale of crops. And you're basically saying that that's what outdoor cultivation can qualify for under use value.
In your income, it has to be 51%.
No, that's hold on.
No, no,
Remember the strawberry growers?
Yeah.
Because they generated over a certain amount of money, they could.
but a small amount of land.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the income qualifier, I just can't recall what.
It's
So they can't qualify under the income as defined by farmer with the feds, but they can with the state.
so to be a farmer, you do, one option is the IRS 50%. And then the next is you produce farm crops that are processed in a farm facility situated on land enrolled by the farmer in use value, and whose gross income from the sale of processed farm products, when added to other gross income from the business of farming, equals at least 1/2 of the farmer's annual income.
Right.
Or, and who produces on the farm a minimum of 75% of the farm crops processed. And that's how they're going to qualify. They're
Got
going to have to show that they're getting, when added to other income from farming, at least 1/2 of the farmer's annual gross income from that farm product.
Got it. Okay, great.
And then for ag land, that's when you get to the small parcel. You have the large parcels, 25 acres or more, or it has produced, it's less than 25 acres, and it's produced an annual gross income from the sale of farm crops in 1 of 2 or 3 of the 5 calendar years of at least $2,000 for parcels of up to 25 acres.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So,
So if I have an acre of strawberries and I am producing a lot of money out of those strawberries, Act 250 has no control.
Oh,
over-
no.
Okay, I've been sitting with Senator McCormick, so he's taking in the transportation bill.
So first of all, you wouldn't trigger Act 250 regardless, right?
Okay.
Because you weren't on a 10-acre parcel.
Well, I've got 10 acres. I do 2
All right.
acres of strawberries, and then I want to put 10 housing.
No, that's not how Act 250 works
Okay.
either. So
I'm just checking.
what Act 250 applies to is for commercial development on a parcel of 10 acres or
Okay.
more, right? And then there are exceptions from what is development. So farming is not development.
Right.
So if you have a, say, 15-acre parcel and you're farming on 5 acres of it, you can basically say that, and the other 10 acres aren't used for commercial development, right? You make the argument that you're exempt because your commercial, the farming is on a parcel that's
Right.
10 acres or more, and the other part of the parcel isn't used for commercial development. Okay?
Commercial is housing, not,
Right, it's a lot of things.
okay.
It's a lot of things. You,
I know Bobby's gonna talk about farm worker housing, so that's not there.
but then say you've got your 5 acres that's used for farming, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna build houses. Well, that's commercial development.
Okay,
You're now going to need, on a parcel that's greater than 10 acres, you're gonna need an Act 250 permit. The fact that farming isn't subject
Okay.
to that Act 250 permit doesn't mean that it exempts the entire parcel from
okay.
Act 250.
It just
Only-
exempts
Just the
this
farm,
activity.
shed.
And so it's regulated, what this says, outdoor cultivation is regulated in the same manner as farming for
Okay,
the purpose, not regulated in the same manner as all exceptions from commercial development.
okay.
Okay, let's keep going.
Right.
Well, Ken, just a couple
Talk about
questions.
farm
So
worker
what does taking out small do? What did small
Small
mean?
grower.
Right, but how is small defined?
A small grow is 1,000 square feet.
Okay, and so how many of those are there and how many are there of non-small?
Well, let's just talk about what the threshold is for non-small. Threshold for non-small is, what was it, 25,000 square feet, 20,000 square feet?
Yeah, it's a happy,
Right,
20,000
square
square
feet. And so that's what you're talking about, the upper threshold for what can be cultivated is 20,000 square feet or up to 625 plants.
And what the board recommended doing the small, crossing that out. They want to do away with that small tier, hoping that the people that are in it will grow, expand. Because they want to make sure that our outdoor growers keep up with the market so that they're supplying more outdoor grow product. So they want to do away with that small section, and then you go that was tier 1 prior. You'd end up being able to do tier 2, 1, 2, and 3 is basically would be a small grower, a medium.
Okay.
But we're talking about a very small portion of property, half acres.
Yeah, half an acre is pretty,
Tiny.
okay.
Although there were cultivators that say that sometimes they space out their grow because they think it's better. And so it might wind up on, I think the largest we heard was 3 acres.
But see, if you put the plants too close together, it's like if you plant your garden and you crowd everything in, it doesn't grow well. But if you give it a little room, and it's better for the soil, because each plant has more soil that it can draw nutrients from. So it's not as hard on the soil either. So they were kind of happy with that, and the board thought that, for everything involved, they'd do away with that small grow, and you'd get more room, and you'd get better plants, and you'd get better cannabis, and you'd do the soil more good. So that's where that.
Happier plants, better cannabis.
Okay, and then I just want to understand the nuisances and
So where are you?
So that's.
Well, there's the nuisance at the bottom, but
Yes, we haven't
I'm just
gotten,
curious about what, have there been reports of nuisances and what?
can we just have Mike present that first?
Oh,
Because we
yeah.
haven't
Sure.
really presented that, and then
So
let's.
on page 3, line 19, Currently, the right to farm gives farmers a rebuttable presumption that their activities do not constitute a nuisance if several factors are met. That they're complying with all state, federal, and local law, that they are in conducting good farming practices, that they were present before the non-agricultural use that is alleging nuisance. And so those are basically the major requirements. And but a person who is alleging nuisance can also defeat that rebuttable presumption by showing that there is a, let me just read you the standard. They can rebut it by showing that the activity has a substantial adverse effect on health, safety, or welfare, or has a noxious and significant interference with the use and enjoyment of the neighboring property. So this basically says that outdoor cannabis cultivation is entitled to that same rebuttable presumption. So it just increases the standard that a person who wants to allege the activity is a nuisance must show in order to find the cannabis cultivation or the farming is a nuisance. It doesn't take away that the neighbor's right to bring an action. It just says that they have to show additional criteria in order to show the nuisance. And that's because in the public policy for the right to farm, it was said that General Assembly finds that agricultural activities are potentially subject to lawsuits based on the theory of nuisance, and that these suits encourage and could force a premature removal of farmlands and other farm resources from agricultural use. It's the purpose of this chapter to protect reasonable agricultural activities conducted on the farm from nuisance lawsuits. But that's why the right to farm is there. And you're saying outdoor cannabis cultivation should have that same rebuttable presumption. Doesn't eliminate nuisance, it just makes it a little bit.
It raises the bar.
Yeah, and I think right to farm is really important because when people move to an area, they frequently, or they sometimes say, wait a minute, I want to change this, and that's not right.
That was pre-existing.
Right,
Not
but
quite
I'm
what
just
they
asking,
expect.
right, well, like nuisances in some cases can be animal noises or animal smells, but in the case of cannabis, are you seeing anyone complaining about
Well,
nuisances?
it's gonna be about odor.
Okay,
It's gonna be about odor, and because this is really opening the door
There is
to out.
odor to cannabis plants.
Yeah, when at certain times, if the wind.
When it's
is blowing
ripening.
Just right.
When the flower is,
well, some people would think that would be a pleasant odor, I would think too. Maybe.
There's some
Anyway, that's what it-
boxwood out there, I don't
that's,
know.
we're gonna keep moving.
Okay.
Because that, the nuisance
I'd be
is,
more concerned if my 8-year-old was harvesting.
Mm,
so last night, just walking down up the Capitol Plaza hallway, I was,
They weren't
buying
growing.
cannabis, all over the place. It was like, whoa, active at.
So
So
to
let's,
summarize
Okay.
what this language does on page 3, it says notwithstanding the provision that cannabis establishments are not farming, outdoor cannabis cultivation receives 5 regulatory benefits of farming. It's exempt from Act 250, it's exempt from municipal bylaw, it can enroll in use value regardless of whether the land was previously in use value. It will be exempt from the sales tax exemptions for agriculture, the 3 that are currently in statute, and it shall be entitled to the rebuttable presumption that it is not a nuisance underneath the right to farm. Now, we had to tweak that last provision about the right to farm because, as I stated earlier, the right to farm says you have to, in order to get that presumption, you have to be compliant with all federal, state, and local law.
right, and the federal part is a challenge.
Right. So federal law currently prohibits cannabis cultivation, and so unless you have this notwithstanding that provision, which is notwithstanding 5753A1A, which is the requirement.
That's at the top of page 4.
Right.
We've moved to
The
page 4.
cultivation has to comply with section B and D of the section, meaning B is it has to comply with all state, federal, and local environmental, energy, and public health law. And then D is it has to comply with the RAPs. So you're not saying that they don't need to be compliant with law, you're just tailoring that.
RAP stands for what again?
Required agricultural practices.
Right,
So
required.
you're tailoring that,
Can't run.
the provision of the right to farm, which requires compliance with all federal, state, and local law to the actual federal, state, and local law that's applicable to cannabis cultivation. And then you move into section 3B, there's some conforming amendments that need to be made to existing cannabis cultivation requirements. Because you said, the General Assembly, that local governments have some authority to regulate by bylaw cannabis establishments, including the ability on page 4, lines 11 through 17, that the commissioners of that local board may condition the issuance of a local control license upon compliance with any bylaw or upon ordinance regulating signs or public nuisances. But because you're granting outdoor cultivation, the right to farm, nuisance protection, and the exemption from municipal bylaws do regulate nuisances. So you have to accept this authority. So accept that ordinances may not regulate public nuisances as applied to outdoor cultivators that are regulated in the same manner as the RAPs under subdivision 869 F2, which is
So that takes.
they municipal bylaws can't regulate required agricultural practices. Municipal bylaws don't apply to nuisances for farming. You're saying municipal bylaws don't apply to outdoor cannabis cultivation as well.
Well, it just raises the bar as it does for the nuisance.
Well, no, this is for municipal regulation of public nuisances. Right to farm is about private nuisances.
No. Okay. Oh, so they can't do this on public nuisance, but doesn't it just raise the bar?
Right, so the
the same way.
municipality can't basically regulate away cannabis, outdoor cannabis cultivation with its municipal public nuisance law.
Yeah, they can't use the nuisance laws as an excuse to stop the growth.
So it doesn't raise the bar on it, it just doesn't
Well,
allow.
you have the municipal exception, municipal bylaw exception. Municipalities have the authority and municipalities can't. Municipalities have, it doesn't apply to agriculture.
Right.
And you're just saying, because you're gonna treat outdoor cultivation for these 5 limited regulatory benefits, that it's not gonna regulate nuisance from outdoor cannabis cultivation. And we had to make some conforming amendments to the underlying cannabis establishment law and the authority you did give local governments in 2020. And
Just quite, did you have any municipalities testify?
Not in
so on page 5, line 3 through 6, and Michelle and Brent are here, and they know this provision better than I do because it's not farming. So prior to issuing a license to cannabis establishments under this chapter, the board shall ensure that the applicant has obtained a local control license from the municipality if required. Unless the board finds that the municipality has exceeded its authority under the section, which you can look at page 5, lines 8 through 12. Municipality is prohibited from doing certain things, and you are adding on lines 10 through 12 that they cannot regulate a cannabis establishment in a manner that has the effect of prohibiting the operation of a cannabis establishment. You can't say the setbacks on the parcel are 500 feet from every boundary on a 3-acre parcel, because that would pretty much eliminate the ability to do anything on the parcel. So you can't you can't use that municipal authority to effectively regulate away the outdoor cultivation of cannabis.
And so VLCT didn't testify on this.
No, they didn't request to come in. and
Oh, really?
We didn't ask them to, we didn't invite them in, but they didn't ask to come in.
So, can I have one question? So,
Yeah.
so the prohibition about regulating a cannabis establishment, that's more than a farm, though, it's a cannabis establishment, right?
That's the store.
No, it could-
Well, that's, I heard farm, but,
Well, the definition of cannabis establishment is broader than just outdoor cultivation.
okay, so this would be outdoor cultivation and
Indoor.
retail, or there's probably other
It's
categories too, but
listed
it's
here.
everything.
And sales.
Michelle might
Okay.
have more input on that.
Hi, so for the record, Michelle Childs,
You'll be right
Office
there.
of Legislative Counsel. So the way that it works is that in order for a retailer or an integrated licensee that's going to be doing sales to the public to operate within a municipality under current law is they have to vote for approval of that, but there's not municipal requirements for voting on any of the other types of licensees, just for people who are selling to the public. And there, and Senator Clarkson, you may recall this when in government operations, we were working on establishment of the commercial system, because I believe you were on
I was.
operations, and the language that is in subsection D around that a municipality shall not prohibit the operation of a cannabis establishment. You might recall is that was intended to be so that they wouldn't use their authority around bylaws and ordinances to effectively do what this language.
Obliterate
Exactly.
the possibility.
I view as the language on subdivision D, one of the changes of clarification of that prohibition. I think just a little bit of anecdotal is that some towns may be reading that as a strict, you cannot in your bylaws say no cannabis establishments, but are then perhaps in the development of ordinances are effectively prohibiting and and you obviously it's a policy choice for you here, but having written that original language, if that was what was at the time intended by Senate Government Operations and in the original legislation when this passed, and I think this just adds a little clarity. It's not just that you can't say a cannabis establishment is prohibited from operating, but that you can't then, through the accumulation of a variety of ordinances and requirements, make it impossible for one to be licensed in your municipality.
No, I think Mike said it well, is you can't use the authority, the municipal authority to regulate cannabis away. So, and the retail, remember, Wendy, we have the for many of us, it's sad that we ended up with an opt-in other than an opt-out for
right, yeah, the
retail.
league
Right,
was,
but only that for retailers.
Yeah, so that is not affected here. So the cannabis establishments here are outdoor cultivators, indoor cultivators, and processors, right?
You have cultivators,
Cultivators,
product manufacturers, you have wholesalers, you have testing laboratories.
Yeah.
And then you have the retailers and then the integrated licensees, which are the dispensaries who are allowed to hold, one license to be vertically integrated within the adult use market. And then now you have the new propagation licenses that are in your
which are in 270.
correct.
So this affects everything but retail. Pretty much.
Well, it would affect retail as well if the town has approved retail,
Got it.
but only if the town has taken affirmative vote to allow retail within the municipality.
Okay. Any questions on, thank you for this work. So the only crowd you didn't hear from, you heard from board, you heard from the growers, you've landed in a place that seems like a good compromise for everybody at the moment for a housekeeping bill. This is, remember, we're trying to look at this as a housekeeping bill. The only crowd you didn't maybe hear from was VLCT.
Yeah, and
Okay.
like I said, they didn't ask to come on.
Got
Certainly, our meetings are just like yours on the tube, so.
On the tube.
Posted everywhere
Yeah.
with
Okay.
no ads.
And, I just
Well, that's another
think
discussion.
that as we move forward with this industry, that, from time to time, there's gonna have to be changes made to fit what we're doing. And this is, like you said, a housekeeping, trying to keep up with the changing times. And
Well, trying to help the first year navigate its way to success, but also not wanting to do anything major and really just
Yeah.
trying to keep it tweaks to enable rather than major tweaks. So thank you. This was terrific. Mike, good to have you in here. Bobby, as always, a pleasure.
Oh, yeah.
You know, as soon as
Sometimes
we
when I
pass
come and
the,
sometimes when I leave, right?
As soon as we pass the wagering bill,
If you need anything else.
We will, thanks.
I'm gonna set up a wager as to how long it's gonna take us to change all of these rules. I grew up in Kentucky. My first image of Kentucky was driving into town with the big rolls of tobacco on the trucks. And Kentucky and those states that grew tobacco did everything they could to encourage the sale and the use of tobacco. My years on health and welfare, the smoking effects of cannabis are worse than the smoking effects of tobacco. So we just outlawed flavored tobacco with the, you gotta suffer the raw stuff because of the health impacts. And on the other side, we are doing everything we can to encourage the growth of cannabis. And I forget who said on the floor when we did that, adults have the right to do stupid things.
Maybe you said that.
No, I was quiet on that issue
Or how we're straight
that
with you.
time.
How you,
But I mean, there's just some, we've recognized that prohibition does not work. So we're allowing things.
sadly, this is true.
But then we're doing everything we can to grow it here, because otherwise it will come in from there and it's like gambling. If it's going to be, we want the money.
If we're surrounded. Yeah,
But
exactly. So
there's,
We sound
Yeah.
somewhat hypocritical, don't we?
It-
we
yeah. And perhaps we are in some ways. I think given our time, and we still need to vote on our confirmation, Michelle, I'm gonna have you start, even though Ginny can't come. You can either stay there or you can come join us and then Ginny we can pull up a chair for Ginny. But I'd love to, because I believe you have the recommendations, anything, thank you.
oh, Lord.
We delegated, so just to remind everybody, we delegated there were a couple sections,
Thank you.
primarily in section 13, to the Senate Health and Welfare Committee to review. This is with medical cannabis, it's mostly medical cannabis, and the recommendations that have been made in 270. So Michelle, we welcome you.
And so we're using hard copies. We're having some technical.
We like hard copies.
issues. I do too.
We
so
can write on them.
That's nice.
and
And
make our
I
notes.
saw this artist present at the Art of the Kents in October. Does anybody ever go to that?
Oh,
And-
yeah.
Oh, it was wonderful. I loved her stuff. It's really great. So nice to see it up here.
Well, we're enjoying our art.
Except I have to have it moved because it's really.
It's freaking you
tricky to
out?
have them
It's
stare at
freaking
me.
her out, but as you could, yeah, so,
They're not warm and fuzzy.
and I look at them and
I
say, oh,
really
they're the
like
I know,
Bronte
I
sisters.
think
Yeah.
they're great.
I think they're great. I just don't like them staring at me.
She's happier with,
That is much more
she's
relaxing.
happier with the cypresses,
Okay.
or the poplars or whatever
Those
they
are
think.
poplars.
Yeah.
All my
Cypresses grow
different
swamps.
ones.
Okay, so we have Senate Health and Welfare here,
Yes.
and Thank you.
And so I'm going to be going over the recommendations of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. You'll see I'm working off draft 1.1 unedited because you'll see that time there, 10:43. That was what, about like 15 minutes ago? So that's the version.
Current, this is very current.
Yes.
So ignore all typos.
So we're working off that draft. And so the first instance of amendments, this was requested there's a few amendments in here that were requested by AHS, and I think they are fitting with your housekeeping theme. And this is on the section.
So before you begin,
Sure.
would you frame up for us the discussion? Do we have agreement, as far as you know, between Cannabis Board and the committee? Is the board in sync with these, or we'll have the board respond?
Yeah, I think I would rather not.
Okay, then just go for it. Sorry.
Sure. So the first instance of amendment is amending chapter 13, section 13, which is the changes to the medical registry program. And in section 954, that's the one that deals with caregivers. So remember that a patient may designate a caregiver. And then in the underlying proposal from the House, it could have caregiver could have 2 patients. This is the way it is now. I think they just felt more comfortable having this language in there, is that Medicaid funds are not to be used to support a caregiver in the cultivation or provision of cannabis. The second instance of amendment, hello. I was just walking through. Would you want me to continue? And
Could we just take a pause, because I know you have to go back to chairing your committee.
I'm good.
We know you're good. That's not a question. If you'd pull up a chair, if you'd frame up, we had Senator Starr just framed up the discussion where you ended up in terms of agreement or not.
Teamwork. Okay.
If you just be kind enough
I
to
will
frame
tee
up
it up. Are you ready?
whether just sort of big picture of what your committee, the lens your committee applied to this, and if we ended up landing in the same, if the board is in agreement and has landed in the same place with the committee and the committee's proposals of amendment.
Okay, so I'll start out with the last thing first. The board is in support.
Is or is?
Yes.
Okay, they are.
Yes, they are. And it's a great board. So, tee it up. When
Yep,
medical
and then-
marijuana began, well, this is about medical marijuana principally.
Yeah.
And so when the program began years ago, it started in health and welfare and was a medical program. And then as, of course, with the illegality of cannabis, judiciary took over, and so the medical marijuana program was not fully discussed in health and welfare committees. Our committee is very interested at continuing work on medical marijuana because we believe it belongs with some oversight and integration with medical issues. So the the amendment that you have before you is our sort of, we're trying to, besides some of the very narrow changes that are made in the bill related to Medicaid or to how frequently a patient must have the card validated. In addition to that, what we put in, which I think is really, from my perspective, critically important, is having an analysis and an understanding of where we stand with respect to medical marijuana, the therapeutic doses, the conditions for which cannabis is important for treatment, integrating the academic detailing program, which is in the proposal amendment, the academic detailing program at the University of Vermont Medical School, and includes a bunch of folks. Those folks have looked at cannabis and have talked with practitioners about how best to utilize cannabis for treatment of which conditions. And then we want to understand which strains are appropriate. So we've put that into some information to come back to our health and welfare committees so that we can begin to get an understanding of the efficacy of the use of cannabis for which specific types of conditions. So just to get that sort of overview and what we've heard from the board, and the board was in this morning to comment and to make some adjustments to the amendment, is that the chair of the board is working very hard with other states and looking at research that's ongoing. Not a lot of it, but understand that there is some research that does support the use of cannabis for treatment of specific conditions. We want to understand what those are. We want to be able to have that communication between, go out to patients, to the public, and to go out to the medical community, because it's a whole new emerging area. Even though we think it's old, it's new.
So I see that that's in your third instance.
Yeah, it is. And
Okay,
so
got
we'll be getting information to come back to us, to the committees of health and welfare, in the case of the House Healthcare Committee. And then any protocols that need changing or direction for rules that might happen as a result of that. We are not interested, I shouldn't say that. I'm very interested in what the treatment modalities will be. I'm very interested in what conditions, but you know, that gets down into some very discrete areas of practice. So we'll see how that, what we do with all that information going forward.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, Tia. So let's,
And we heard from the Vermont Medical Society as well. So we've had folks in to talk about this.
great.
Thank you.
That's, we directed them to you, who were dealing with this section. Thank you very much. for
Okay,
your work.
so I'm thinking on taking this up and putting it on as a floor amendment. Is that true?
No, our objective is to integrate it into this. We'll have you present the section.
Love to.
We will yield
Okay,
to the senator from
We're good.
Chittenden, South, whatever.
whatever. Southeast.
Southeast.
I
Whatever.
don't feel like. I'm
So
southeast.
I'm a big believer in yielding to the people who know what they're talking about.
This is good.
So we
Okay.
will yield to you and we will yield to Bobby.
Okay, thank
I'm
you.
not sure Bobby is as excited about being yielded to as you, but hey, you know, we're gonna,
If I
so-
can't answer a question, I'm gonna yield to you.
right. I who know the least.
Okay.
So we have Michelle for another 15 minutes to go through this, and then we're just gonna vote on the,
It'll be quick, and I think a lot easier than the last amendment.
yeah, no, that was, the last one actually has quite a bit of substance in addition. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the second instance of amendment, starting on line 10. So there is, again, in section 13, section 955, that's the provision in law that addresses the annual renewal for patients and caregivers and requiring them to pay their $50 fee every year and to have their medical provider fill out that medical verification form where they are simply stating that the patient has a qualifying condition. Again, remember, they're not recommending or prescribing. The board had requested that for those qualifying conditions that were kind of lifelong or intractable, that the patient wouldn't have to come and do all of that paperwork and do that every year. They wanted it to be only 5 years for those qualifying medical conditions, but leaving chronic pain as an annual renewal. And the Committee on Health and Welfare bumped that down from 5 years to 3 years.
And chronic pain is still annual.
Chronic pain is still annual, correct?
Okay, and the board was okay with that?
I think their testimony was that
Yeah.
they had asked for 5 and their
Yeah, no,
preference is 5,
that's true.
but
Well, we're gonna hear from Brendan a bit.
So section 14A is adding some new sections that are related to the medical program. And the first one, section 14A, is, so if you'll recall, if for caregivers currently, they are required to have a fingerprint supported NCIC national criminal history check. And the board had proposed that it be changed to a name and date of birth Vermont record check. as well as a check of the two the civil protection registries that are kept by AHS. There's the child protection registry kept by DCF, and then there's the Dale vulnerable adult registry. And those are used primarily for checking for employment purposes and things like that, to see whether or not someone's been civilly substantiated, not whether they may not have a criminal record or anything like that. And so this first amendment on section 14A is just giving the DCF the ability to share that information with the CCB, because they're only allowed to share it with specifically enumerated entities. So we want to add that in there. And then section 14B is doing the same thing to the vulnerable adult registry.
Okay, so
So
B
that's
is
at the-
vulnerable adult.
Yep. And that's at the top of page 2. Section 14C is, you recall, in the bill as it came over from the House, there is a provision within the
So wait a
register.
minute, sorry, I hate to interrupt, but there's no language, there's just a title here. It says, it's at the bottom of page 1,
Flip on to 2.
and then 2 says C right at the top.
Right, so
So there's no finishing up of B is, I guess, my question. You were talking about, there's no word vulnerable adult anywhere here.
so bottom of page 1.
Yeah,
So section 14B of the bill is amending 6911.
Right.
The title of 6911 is Records of Abuse, Neglect, and Exploitation. That relates to the vulnerable adult registry. That's just not in the title of that section.
oh, okay, so they may disclose,
And so if you see at the top of page 2,
yeah,
subsection C, says the commissioner, when they're talking about the commissioner, they're talking about Dale, because this is the chapter that we're working in.
right,
May disclose registry information only to, and then it adds the CCB for purposes of evaluating the suitability of a registered caregiver.
and this is particularly for vulnerable adults, this section.
That's just, that's vulnerable adult registry.
Thanks. It just doesn't say it anywhere, so it's helpful, yeah.
Right.
And the first one was for
The child protection registry.
child protection. Okay, great.
So section 14C, so in the bill as it came over from the House, there's a provision, it amends a provision in the registry that says that when the board is adopting rules pertaining to the registry, that no new rule under the CCB is to be more restrictive than the previous rules that the Department of Public Safety had for the medical registry. And so remember, before the CCB was established, the whole medical program was regulated by the Department of Public Safety. And Vermont has a pretty restrictive medical program. So when the legislation was adopted in 2020, with the addition of the adult use coming online, they didn't want to have a really restrictive medical program when they have and have a more expansive adult use, for the reasons that I've heard, that the board has talked about, in the sense of you have statutory language saying that you want to continue and support the medical registry. So you wanted the ability to be able to have similar rules. And so that was struck. So that was why the language was originally put in there. However, it has become a problem in the sense that you'll recall that under DPS, DPS never adopted rules around testing or a number of issues. And
They still haven't done it?
no,
They don't
so
need to now.
DPS is gone.
Yeah, right. Oh, so they
CCB
never did that originally,
Right, so, and the Cannabis Control Board Anybody here on LCAR? So if you are, you know, they've adopted extensive rules around all sorts of things around testing and
Right.
things. And this could be read as being restricting them from adopting those types of rules. And you obviously don't want to do that. And so we made a change in the underlying bill to the registry portion. This is the same change, but in the dispensary. We just missed it when we were kind of going through initially. So this is just going to make sure that there's no conflicts there and that they can have robust rules around a number of issues that previously were not addressed in the DPS rules.
Got it. Okay, great.
And then the final section is section 13D. And this is the provision that Senator Lyons was talking about. And so it directs the Cannabis Control Board.
So we're going back to section 13. D, okay. Great. Are we adding a section D?
Oh, that should be 14D, sorry. Wait,
Yeah, I was gonna
is it 13? Or did I do
Canada
13?
reporting is,
Oh, these should be 13. I don't know. I'll look,
Whatever, you
don't
can
worry
figure
about the
that out.
numbering.
Okay,
I've got to
great.
integrate all
I was
these
just trying to
amendments
find
into
the-
one. Yeah. But we're looking at the amendment starting on line 16 on page 2. And so the Cannabis Control Board is to work with the Vermont Academic Detailing Program. I will just say, I don't really know anything about that program because I just wrote this, but it's something that the Senator Lyons sits on and they look at.
And it exists.
Yeah, it exists.
Okay.
And it's from UVM, so it must be good.
Okay, so is to work with that program as well as registry patients and caregivers, licensed medical cannabis dispensaries and medical professional stakeholders to review the registry. And then you'll see on page 3, there's a number of things that they're to take under consideration. They're supposed to look at the qualifying medical conditions and the types of illnesses and symptoms that are most appropriate for treatment with cannabis, the types of strains that are recommended for treatment, the doses that are recommended, appropriate treatment for protocols for patients, including whether or not there should be medical oversight like counseling or things like that. You see subdivision 5, how the use of cannabis is communicated to patients and patients' providers and any other issues that would improve the registry. Subsection B is requiring the board to hold at least 4 meetings. And then subsection C is asking the board to report to the committees on Senate Committee on Health and Welfare, as well as the Healthcare Committee and Human Services Committee in the House.
right.
Are they a legal thing?
Hmm?
Okay, you check.
Yeah, if you want
It's a real thing. I Googled it, but I just didn't have time to read
Academic
it.
Detailing Program is a university-based provider, prescriber education and support program.
This is you.
And the goal is to promote high-quality, evidence-based, patient-centered, and cost-effective treatment decisions by healthcare professionals. So it is a program that is not funded by the pharmaceutical industry. There's no sponsorship. Uses funding from public and private sources, including the state of Vermont. It reviews stuff and talks about it.
Got it.
But we should go with medical marijuana has always been, you can't do any research because the feds have banned doing research. And we do need to start doing some research and knowing what it is effective for and what it isn't effective for.
I think this is good. I think,
Probably the best we're gonna get.
great. And the effective dates.
And the effective dates, so is that sections 13, which is the medical sections, as well as, and then I'll true it up wherever I
Right,
decide. Because I'm gonna have to change everything because of the ag amendment, so
Right.
I have to just wait till everything's all
I
together.
think our hope is that we'll incorporate all of these into the bill and just do a strike all for the whole bill.
Okay.
Because we have some additional amendments we're gonna talk about next week with Bryn that incorporate some of Senator Vyhovsky's proposals. and which I think you two are working on, hopefully.
I am.
Okay, great, and,
And I think the board has has a few other little housekeeping.
and I think we have some additions, yeah. So, given our time frame, I hate to say this, we will talk about these more fully when Bryn and Pepper come on Wednesday.
And I want 2 minutes to talk about the gambling.
Okay, but you and I can talk about that.
But if it's going on the floor, if I vote it out today, no, it'll be on notice.
It has to go to a
Tuesday.
pro,
Okay, all right.
and it has to go to a pro.
So can I ask you what you want,
I think, maybe not. We'll chat about that.
She's just.
how you want, what you would like in writing from me for the next meeting on Wednesday? So I'm gonna have a standalone on the Vihoski issues.
Yeah,
And then do you want me?
I think
to-
we want to look at those first
Right.
and hear from the board about
And
why.
then do you want me to write up the technical housekeeping from the board? I guess I'm trying to figure out.
Absolutely.
Okay,
I think
have those?
we should be reviewing all the proposals for this housekeeping bill and be making decisions on them if we
Okay,
can.
but do you want me to roll all this stuff into a committee amendment for you for next Wednesday, or no, hold off on that?
I would hold on that, but I would get everything drafted so that we have all the recommendations drafted from ag, from health and welfare, from the pieces of the Vihoski bill we want to look at, and the technical
All right,
amendments.
so I'll do a separate one for the CCB,
Right.
and then you'll look at Vihoski's, and then these are done.
These are done. We just need to, we haven't discussed them.
Right, but I mean, in terms of.
But they're done,
Right,
And
those are-
we will make decisions about them
And then on
on Wednesday.
Wednesday, you can tell me, and then I'll.
So
go back and-
everybody's homework is to review these and make decisions. Thank you
Okay.
both. More to follow. Thank you. This is great. We're moving
Okay,
along.
I had one question from a constituent, a newspaper. Well, I think the board, it was, why can't we advertise?
But we're gonna get to that because
Okay.
we have an amendment on
I
advertising.
thought I saw one, but that was a question
Yeah.
that came up.
It's a good question and there are people who want to testify and they have a proposal and we're gonna hear from the board.
Probably among them.
And and right now we're gonna vote on Wednesday.
Are we? Okay,
I'm-
so,
What are we
I'll call
voting on?
so someone's making a motion to
confirm
confirm
Wendy Knight.
Commissioner Wendy
Oh.
Knight to the Department of Liquor and Lottery. So somebody's motioning that,
I'll
right?
move.
Okay, so
Right.
Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Cummings,
Yes.
Senator Harrison is a yes. Senator Ron Hinsdale is not here.
No, but
So the vote is 4-0-0.
No,
0-1.
401.
4-0-1.
4-0. One's
Thank
missing.
you.
And
Okay.
if we hear from her before the end of the day, maybe we could reach out and get her vote.
I've got to go get my
Okay.
thing on
We're on the
Commissioner
floor.
Yeah, I'd
Bolio
like
in
to
case
see there.
we do that.
So-
Wendy, I need to let you know.
Okay, we're adjourning.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. We will see you tomorrow at, oh, did I